Hey everyone, Promise.all method takes an iterable of promises as an input and returns a single promise that resolves to an array of results of the input promises. What does that mean? Let's understand with an example. So what we have here is a promise.all. It takes an iterable as a parameter. This iterable is an array of promises. So promise 1 contains a normal promise.resolve statement. Promise 2 doesn't contain even a promise, it contains a normal primitive integer value. Promise 3 contains a new promise inside which we are calling the resolve method inside a set timeout after a delay of 100 milliseconds and passing foo as an argument. So what will this promise.all will return? It will return us the results of all these three promises. If but It will only return that result when all of these three promises are resolved. In case any one of these promises is rejected, this promise.all promise will also be rejected. So let's see what will happen if I save this and run this in the browser. So you see we get 3, 42 and 4. So this is the result of these three promises that we passed to it. 3 from promise 1, 42 from promise 2 and 4 from promise 3. One thing to notice is there it also maintains the sequence or the order in which these promises were called. So let's say if I put promise 3 on second place and promise 2 on third place, if I save this, you'll see that the array will contain foo in second place now. So the results will be in the order in which the promises were arranged inside the iterable. So let's see how we can write a polyfill for it. Without wasting any time, let's dive into the code. So to implement our own promise.all, what we can do, we can write promise and name it myall. So it will be a function which will take values as a parameter. These values will be iterable of promises, and inside that function what will return a new promise. So it will take two things, resolve and reject, two functions. Now what we need to do, we need to loop through all these promises inside the values iterable. So we'll use the for each method to loop through the values array. And we'll use the dot then method to resolve each of them one by one, and we'll get the result. And we can, to store this result, we can have an array. Let's declare an output array here, and once we get this result, we can just append it inside the output array. But this is not a right way to do it, because these values are not necessarily synchronous operation. These can be asynchronous operation as well. So as we seen as promise 3 example, it is a promise that contain a set timeout in it, which will be run after 100 milliseconds. So as per our current code, this promise third will take the longest time to be completed and will be stored at the end, so at the last index. But if we see the output of the promise.all, the result was stored at the first index. So we have to maintain the sequence of the result as well. So if the promise 3 is put on index 1, the result in the output also should be stored in the result 1 for this promise 3. So to maintain that, what we can do, we can have index value as well provided by the for each variable, and instead of directly pushing it inside the array, we can store it at that particular index in the output array. So using this approach, we can also maintain the sequence in which the promises were arranged in the iterable. So what does that mean? The result returned by the promise at 0th index, its result will also be stored in at the 0th index of our output array. And the result returned by the promise at index 2, its its result will also be stored at the second index of our output array, and so on. So now, when should we call this resolve method? So as per the definition of promise.all, our promise should only resolve when all of these promises inside the iterable are resolved. So for that, what we can do, we can have a variable completed, a counter variable, and we can initialize at 0. And inside the dot then function, we can increment it every time we call the dot then method. And we can check if this completed counter variable is equals to values dot length. So that means if this condition is true, if completed is equal to values dot length, that means all of the promises inside the iterable array are successfully resolved now. So in that case, we'll call our resolve method and pass the output array as a parameter. Now to handle the reject case as well. So if in any scenario, if in any of the one of these promises is rejected, what we'll do, we'll just call the reject method and pass the error as a value to it. So now if I call promise.myall method instead of promise.all, save it and see in the console, oh, we are getting one error that promise.then is not a function. So this is because of this second promise, which contains a normal value 40 to it. So it is not a promise, it is just a normal value. So to handle this case, what we can do, we can wrap this value in promise dot resolve function. So what it will does, all the values which we are getting from the for each will be treated as a promise, so that even if we get a normal value, it will be treated as a promise. So now if I save this and go to the console again, now we are getting the expected result. So if I uncomment this previous promise.all and save it, so you will see both of these return the same result. So this was the polyfill for promise.all. We can also test the reject statement. So if any of one of these, so let's say instead of promise2, it was promise.reject, and it will just a message, let's say err. If we save this, you'll see this promise is rejected. So that was the condition in which the promise.all will be rejected if either any one of the promise gets rejected. So this was the polyfill for promise.all. Thank you for watching.